Three things defined my childhood: silence, obedience, and the way my parents looked through people like they were glass. My name is Claire. When I was 7, I learned that love in my house had a price, and my heart wasn't rich enough to pay it. That's when I realized the people meant to protect me were capable of throwing anyone away, including me. And years later, when they met the man I loved, they tried to do it again. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Type it in the comments. Now, let me take you back to the first time I understood what not my problem meant. It was the kind of fall afternoon that tries to lie about winter. The air was crisp, golden, and cold enough to kiss the tip of your nose, but not quite bite. I remember the crunch of leaves under my too small sneakers, my fingers numb around a warm little body. The kitten was barely bigger than my hand, shivering inside my coat as I sat in the backseat of my dad's old Jeep. She had followed me home 2 days ago, tail high, eyes wide with trust. I named her Minty. She slept beside me under my blanket, and for the first time in weeks, I stopped waking up from bad dreams about school. "I'll feed her myself," I had begged that morning, brushing crumbs off the kitchen table as Mom skimmed the mail with her usual tired disinterest. "You don't even finish your green beans, Claire," she replied without looking up. "We are not feeding strays. Not when groceries already cost a fortune." I looked at Dad. He was pouring cereal into his travel mug again, the kind of thing he did instead of saying goodbye. "It's not our problem," he muttered. That was the end of the conversation. Not a pause, not a question about how I felt. Just the usual slam of the garage door and the silence that followed it. 2 hours later, I sat next to Minty in the back seat, watching the faded gray building grow closer. Humane Pet Society drop-offs around back. I tried once more, voice cracking. What if I used my own money from Grandma's birthday card? Mom didn't even flinch. "You're 7, she said, like it was a diagnosis. "You don't have money, and even if you did, we are not a zoo. This is the responsible thing." The responsible thing was her favorite phrase. She used it when she threw out old artwork, when she sold my favorite bike without asking, when she missed school plays because someone has to work. When we parked, I clutched Minty tighter. She made a tiny squeaking noise that sounded suspiciously like a question. I whispered back, "I'm sorry, I really wanted to keep you." My mother didn't wait. She held the door open like a formality, her heels clacking down the sidewalk as my dad leaned into the car and nodded once. "Let's go, Claire." I stepped out. My arms felt heavy with guilt, like I was handing over more than a kitten. We walked through the narrow side entrance where a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard met us. Minty clung to my sweater, mewling. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Mom said through her teeth. That's when something shifted in my chest. Not like a snap, more like a quiet folding. Like a page in a story that suddenly goes blank. I placed Minty inside the metal crate. Her green eyes stayed locked on mine. When the woman closed the latch with a quiet click, I knew I wouldn't cry. Not where they could see. The ride home was silent. No one asked how I felt. No one said thank you for being brave. They just acted like the day had happened the way it was supposed to. But that night, under my blanket that now felt too big and too cold, I stared at the ceiling and whispered what I should have screamed. I would have fed her, and I meant it. Even at 7, I knew I'd rather go hungry than feel that kind of abandonment again. By the time I turned 15, I had stopped asking for things. No more birthday wish lists. No more camp permission slips. No more begging for art supplies in the middle of back-to-school sales. I'd learned my place in the family economy early, useful, quiet, low maintenance. Anything beyond that was considered excessive, or worse, ungrateful. So instead of homecoming dresses and movie nights, I had the closing shift at Daisy's Diner, a little roadside cafe with chipped coffee mugs and a jukebox that only played country hits from the 90s. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid in real money, and real money, I learned, never forgot your name. I started working there just after my 15th birthday. Technically, you had to be 16, but Daisy, the owner, had a soft spot for kids who showed up early and kept their head down. I did both. "You're like a little ghost with a sponge," she joked once, watching me wipe down the counter for the 3rd time in an hour. "Ever think of slowing down?" "No," I said and meant it. I worked 6 evenings a week. I swept, I scrubbed, I learned the regulars' orders by heart and how to pour a perfect cup of coffee without spilling a drop. I liked the rhythm of it. The sound of the bell over the door, the hiss of the griddle, the low murmur of stories told between bites of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. It was the only place where I felt like what I did actually mattered. But every Friday, without fail, I'd come home from my shift to find one of my parents sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through my envelope of cash. "We'll just borrow a little," Mom would say, as if she were asking for sugar instead of slicing into my future. "Just until the 15th, Dad would add, already pocketing 2 20s. "Gas is brutal this month." They always promised to pay me back. They never did. At first, I kept a little notebook. I wrote down every dollar, thinking maybe they'd forget and be glad for the reminder. When I mentioned it one night, Dad laughed so hard he nearly choked on his meatloaf. "You don't need allowance," he wheezed. "You've got your own hustle." Mom joined in, sipping wine from the only crystal glass we owned. "Besides," she said, "family helps family. Isn't that what you always say?" I didn't remember ever saying that, but I nodded anyway. It became a sort of ritual. They'd take, I'd replenish. I started hiding 10% of every paycheck in a tampon box in my closet. It was the one place I knew they wouldn't touch. And when the money ran low, which it always did, there was never an apology, only the suggestion that I should pick up more hours. I remember watching my classmates come into the diner sometimes, laughing in groups, flashing debit cards their parents loaded every week. They ordered lattes and cheese fries and never looked at the prices. I kept my head down, cleared their plates, smiled politely when someone said, "Wait, you go to Ridgeview, right?" One time I caught Kayla Jennings, the girl with perfect hair and even better parents, staring at my name tag as she paid her bill. "You work here?" she asked, her tone neutral but laced with curiosity. I nodded. "Why?" I shrugged. "I like it." It wasn't a lie. I liked having a place that didn't ask me to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. I liked the smell of syrup and bacon grease and lemon-scented cleaner. I liked being good at something. But mostly, I liked that the tip jar didn't talk back or ask me why I wasn't smiling more. Back home, dinner was usually whatever I could microwave before the clock struck midnight. My parents stopped waiting up years ago. "Text if you're gonna be late," Mom had said once. But I could count on one hand how many times they actually noticed if I didn't. I started sketching again that year. On napkins, receipts, the backs of unused order tickets. Faces, mostly tired ones. My own sometimes. I wasn't very good yet, but when I drew, the diner faded and the silence of my house didn't feel so loud. I kept the drawings in a shoebox under my bed. That and the money in the tampon box were the only things that felt truly mine. One night after my shift, I came home to find Dad in the garage, sorting through tools. "We're gonna need you to cover the water bill this month," he said, not looking up. "Your mom's car needs new brakes." He didn't say thank you. He didn't ask, just dropped it like a demand disguised as duty. I nodded, went upstairs, counted out the bills in my tampon box like a cashier closing her drawer. Quiet, efficient, numb. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something cold and honest. They didn't see me as their daughter. I was their backup plan, their little ghost with a sponge. I never expected anything good to happen at a school I didn't want to be in. I dreamed of going to the Technical Institute 3 hours north, graphic media and industrial design, full scholarships if I could just make the grades. But when I brought home the pamphlet, bright-eyed and hopeful, Mom didn't even glance at it before muttering, "Too expensive, dear." Dad's only contribution was, "Try community. You're not trying to be some startup CEO." And that was that. So I ended up at Valley Heights, a modest art college with more ambition than budget, 10 minutes from home and 1,000 miles from what I wanted. The classrooms smelled like old paint. Half the professors were part-time. The best thing about the place was the silence, and I clung to it like a secret. I didn't join clubs, I didn't go to parties, I didn't have time. Between classes, part-time shifts at the bookstore, and weekend hours at the diner, I barely had space to breathe. Most students complained about too many lectures. I envied them. At least someone thought their time was valuable. But I drew. Every night, after dinner in my tiny dorm kitchenette, I'd pull out my sketchbook and draw until the world made sense. Sometimes just faces. Other times, whole scenes, silent diners with empty booths, little girls holding stray cats, worn-out girls in too big cardigans always standing alone. I was halfway through one of those sketches when he first spoke to me. "You always sit here." I glanced up, startled. A guy was standing on the far edge of the lawn, holding 2 coffees. He looked my age, maybe a bit older. Wavy brown hair, jeans that weren't ripped on purpose, and a quiet confidence that didn't scream for attention. I blinked. "Only when it's not freezing." He smiled and took a cautious step forward. "Mind if I sit?" I didn't know how to say yes without sounding desperate, so I shrugged. "Sure, it's a public bench." He handed me one of the coffees. "Hazelnut, took a gamble." I stared at the cup, suspicious. "Why? You always bring your own mug." "Figured maybe you'd like someone bringing something to you for once." I didn't say anything, just held the coffee and tried not to shake. His name was Luke. He was a graphic design major, soft-spoken and kind in a way that didn't feel performative. He didn't ask questions I didn't want to answer. Didn't pry about where I worked or why I always seemed tired. He just showed up. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, with coffee or a sandwich. Or those little wrapped mint candies no one really likes, except I did. I never told him, but he noticed. He didn't talk much about himself either, just small things. That his dad traveled a lot for work. That he grew up near the lake and once built a treehouse that collapsed after one day. That his mom passed away when he was 13. The way he said it, calm, like it was just another fact, made me want to tell him things too. One chilly October night, we sat on the grass behind the student commons, watching our breath cloud in the air. I had just finished a midterm that felt like pulling teeth with a pencil, and my fingers were still stained with charcoal. Luke handed me a sandwich wrapped in foil. "No mustard, I remember. You're dangerously observant." He chuckled and leaned back on his elbows. "You ever gonna tell me what you're really thinking?" I hesitated. No one had asked me that without expecting something in return. No one had waited in silence for an answer that might not come. But something about the way he looked at me, like I wasn't a problem to be solved, made the words come easier than they should have. "I think," I said slowly, "you're the first person who's never asked anything from me." He didn't smile at that, just nodded like it was the kindest and saddest thing I could have said. We sat there for a long time, not touching, not needing to. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Not the polite kind I gave customers. Not the forced one I used when my parents asked if I was still doing the art thing. A real one. Quiet, earned. That night I added something new to my sketchbook, 2 figures on a hill sitting just far enough apart to breathe. And in the margins, a note I never meant to show anyone. Maybe love doesn't have to be loud to be real. It took me 3 years to bring Luke home. 3 years of shared grocery lists, cheap takeout dinners on mismatched plates, early morning bus rides and late-night paper deadlines. 3 years of good days, bad weeks, slow healing, quiet love. He never asked to meet them, never pushed. But I could tell he was curious, about the shadows I avoided, about the family I only mentioned in passing with a tight jaw and a forced laugh. So when he asked, gently, one evening in early spring, "Would it be too weird if I met your folks?" I didn't say no. I wanted to believe they'd changed, or at least pretend for an afternoon. I called my mom first. "Dinner," she repeated, sounding like I'd asked her to donate a kidney. "Well, that's short notice." "It's a week from now," I said. She sighed. "And who's this? Friend?" "His name's Luke. He's important to me." A pause. "We'll see what your father says." I already knew what he'd say, and I was right. The following Sunday, Luke and I pulled into my parents' driveway, a pristine suburban display of hedges and pressure-washed siding, and I felt like I was 15 again, clutching a paycheck and a silent apology. "Are you nervous?" Luke asked as he put the car in park. "No," I lied, then gave a tight smile. "Okay, maybe a little there, particular." He reached for my hand. "I'll be on my best behavior." I didn't say what I was thinking, that his best would never be enough for them. The moment we stepped inside, I could feel it, the judgment thick as the lemon-scented air. Mom had clearly been cleaning all morning. The plastic slipcovers were back on the couch. The fancy dishes were out, but the tension, that had never left. "Claire," my mother said with a brittle smile, air-kissing me on the cheek. You didn't say he'd be so casual. Luke wore what he always wore, jeans, a clean button-down, and that soft, steady calm I loved about him. But to her, it may as well have been a burlap sack. "This is Luke," I said, forcing brightness into my tone. "He brought your favorite sourdough." Dad took it, barely grunting a greeting. "Didn't know we were feeding extras tonight. You eat meat, Luke?" "Yes, sir. We're having roast. Hope you don't mind rare." Dinner was set like a stage meet in the middle, silence on all sides. My father carved with the solemnity of a surgeon, while Mom poured wine like a judge handing down a sentence. "Luke," she began after a few forced bites. "What does your family do?" Luke smiled politely. "My dad's in tech, private sector, travels a lot." "Tech," Dad repeated. "Like coding or just selling stuff. He's more on the development side." "Ah," a beat passed, then, "And you make art, Claire says." "Graphic design," Luke replied. "Brand identity, visual language. I do freelance and some commissioned work for local businesses." Mom arched a brow. "Freelance, so, not stable." I felt heat rush up my neck. "It's actually pretty consistent," Luke said evenly. "And I'm building a solid client base." Dad chuckled under his breath. "Client base sounds like sales talk." Mom glanced at me. "We just always hoped you'd find someone more polished." That was the last straw. I stood up so fast my chair scraped back. "You could have at least pretended to care." They both blinked at me like I'd shouted in church. "We invite you into our home," Mom began. "No," I cut in. "You tolerated me, and barely that." I grabbed my coat, throat burning, heart hammering. Luke followed without a word. We left our plates half full. I didn't care. Outside, the night was sharp and quiet, like it was holding its breath. Luke opened the passenger door for me, but I couldn't get in yet. I just stood there, shaking. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He looked surprised. "For what?" "They embarrassed me." He shook his head. "Claire, no, they embarrassed themselves." I let out a breath. The kind you don't realize you've been holding for years. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel ashamed. I just felt done. We didn't talk for the first few minutes of the drive. Luke had the heat on low, soft instrumental music playing from his phone, something gentle, like he could feel how thin my skin had become. I sat with my hands in my lap, watching my parents' house fade in the rearview mirror. That white siding, those trimmed hedges, the same porch light that had flickered for a decade because my father insisted it still worked fine. Everything about it was frozen in time except me. Luke's hand rested on the gearshift, relaxed, comfortable. He hadn't said a single bad thing about them, not during dinner, not after, not now, but I could feel his silence speaking louder than anything. Finally, I broke it. "I'm sorry." He glanced at me. "You already said that." "I know, but I keep thinking maybe if I'd prepared you better. Told you what to expect." "Claire." He pulled the car over slowly, tires crunching on the gravel shoulder near the edge of a quiet overlook. Then he turned to face me. "I didn't go there expecting perfection. I went because I care about you." My throat tightened. "They made you feel small." "No," he said gently. "They tried, but they didn't succeed." That silenced me. I stared out at the black trees silhouetted against the moonlit sky. "You know what hurt the most?" I whispered. "It wasn't what they said. It was realizing I've spent my whole life hoping they'd fake it better, just once. That they'd pretend to be proud of me, or interested, or human." Luke reached across the console and took my hand. His fingers were warm, steady. "I've seen you drag yourself to class after double shifts," he said softly. "I've seen your sketchbook filled with worlds no one else notices. I've watched you give more than you ever had to people who gave you nothing in return. You don't need them to see you, Claire. You see you. That's more than most people ever manage." Tears stung behind my eyes, but not the kind that begged for pity. These were quieter, older, the kind that had waited too long for someone to say the exact words I didn't know I needed. "I used to think," I paused, searching for the truth beneath my voice. "I used to think if I could just make them proud, go to the right school, bring home the right person, get the job, play the part, maybe I'd finally matter to them." Luke didn't interrupt. He just waited. I looked at him. "But they don't see me, not really. They see what I cost them." His eyes didn't flinch. "Then stop trying to earn what you already deserve." The words fell between us like a puzzle piece snapping into place. I leaned my head on his shoulder, closing my eyes. "I'm so tired," I said. "I know," he replied. "But you're not alone." The car was still, warm, safe. It felt nothing like the place we just left, and everything like the place I'd always wanted to find. We sat there for a long time, no destination, no rush, just two people in the dark, finally facing the light. Eventually, I whispered, "They didn't embarrass me." Luke looked down at me, brows raised. "They just made me realize," I said, "I never want to be like them." His arm wrapped around my shoulders then, quiet and sure. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't a need. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was full of decisions, of truth, of clarity. And as he drove us home, one thing became achingly clear. This us, the quiet, the real, was the beginning of my new family. Not the one I was born into, the one I was choosing. It was supposed to be just a weekend escape. Luke had borrowed his roommate's beat-up Jeep, and we'd pack the back with blankets, cheap snacks, and a thermos of coffee that kept sloshing into the cup holders. We were headed for a small cabin his family kept near the edge of Logan Lake. Nothing fancy, just pine trees, silence, and a porch swing that creaked when the wind shifted right. After dinner, we always made this trip. Luke called it a mind rinse. No phones, no pressure. Just art supplies, flannel, and long conversations under a blanket of stars. We were 30 minutes out when the radio, half-tuned to a local news station, chirped to life. Billionaire tech mogul Eric McAllister made a rare public appearance today at the annual STEM Futures Summit. Luke reached for the dial, but not fast enough. I blinked. "Wait, what did she say, Eric McAllister?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, that's my dad." I stared at him. Laughed once, unsure if it was a joke. "Your dad?" Luke glanced at me, still driving like it was just another Tuesday. "Yeah." Silence ballooned between us, thick and stunned. "You never said anything," I managed, still trying to process the words. "I know," he said. "That was kind of the point." My mouth opened, then shut again. I don't understand. Your dad is Eric McAllister, the Eric McAllister, like. Startup empire, Forbes cover, 10 million followers on LinkedIn, Eric McAllister. Luke smiled faintly, eyes still on the road. "That's the one." I stared at him, stunned. All this time, the shared sandwiches, the cheap mugs, the tucked-in shirts and thrifted jeans. The hours he spent helping me reformat my portfolio on a second-hand laptop that wheezed every time it opened a file. This boy had brought me dollar coffees and folded my hoodie on cold benches and walked me home in the rain because I forgot my umbrella, and never once mentioned he could have called a driver instead. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Because I wanted to know if you'd still want me if I wasn't one." I blinked, thrown. "What does that even mean?" "I didn't want to be a walking price tag," he said. "I've watched people do backflips to impress my dad, kiss up to me just to get close to him. It's exhausting. I wanted to find someone who cared if I listened, if I remembered their favorite sandwich, if I kept their secrets." I sat back in the seat, breath catching. "So, this whole time you've just been what? Testing me?" "No," he said softly. "This wasn't a test. This was the first time I felt like I didn't have to be anyone but me." I didn't know what to say. 1,000 thoughts flew through my mind. My parents' sneers, their obsession with status and polish, their constant reminder that someone like Luke couldn't measure up. And now I was sitting next to a man whose family owned more than my hometown's annual budget. And he'd never used it against me, not once. "You've seen where I live," I said after a long pause. "You've met my parents, you heard what they said to you." Luke's hand tightened briefly on the wheel. "Yeah. And you never once pulled the 'do you know who I am' card." His smile turned dry. "Would it have changed anything?" "No," I admitted, "but it might have shut them up." "That's not the kind of power I want," he said simply. "You didn't fall in love with a name, neither did I." I stared at him, stunned by the quiet grace of it all, and then suddenly I laughed, a shaky, real laugh that spilled out of me like steam from a kettle. "God," I said, wiping my eyes. "When they find out," Luke grinned. "Yeah, that's going to be interesting." "I'm going to make popcorn," I added, still laughing. He reached over and gently threaded his fingers through mine. "You don't have to prove anything to them, Claire, not ever again." I looked at him, at this man who could have bought my parents' approval 10 times over, who could have crushed their pride under the weight of his last name and chose instead to be soft, patient, honest. "I'm not doing it for them," I said. "I'm doing it for me." His thumb brushed over my knuckles. Good. Outside, the trees blurred past us in streaks of dark green and gold. Inside, everything felt new. And for the first time in my life, I realized it was never about finding someone with money. It was about finding someone with integrity. I didn't plan to tell them. Not right away. Not at all, if I'm honest. I figured they didn't deserve to know. Luke had never been a status symbol, and I wasn't about to hand them a chance to recast him as one. But the truth has a way of slipping out. Started with a post. A photo Luke's cousin had uploaded from a charity gala. Luke was in the background, black suit, clean-cut, laughing beside a man in a sharp gray tuxedo. The caption read, "Eric and Luke McAllister supporting STEM futures this weekend. 3 generations of innovation in one room." That was it. No flashing lights. No press conference. But it found its way to Mom faster than the flu. 2 days later, I got the call. "Claire!" Her voice was breathless, almost girlish. "Is it true? Your Luke is that McAllister?" I paused. "Why?" She laughed, high-pitched, nervous. "Because I was just talking to Margie at the club and she said he was on the news with his father. I had no idea. You should have told us." "No," I said slowly. "You never asked." There was a beat of silence. Then, almost too quickly, "Well, your father and I were just saying we might have judged him a bit, prematurely." I could picture it, my mother clutching pearls that hadn't seen daylight in years, Dad standing awkwardly in the background, trying to remember what he'd said that night over dinner. Probably telling himself he hadn't meant it like that. "He comes from such an impressive family," she continued. "And his father, oh, I mean Eric McAllister, that changes things, doesn't it?" There it was. Not he's kind, not he makes you happy, just he's valuable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't snap. I just let the silence stretch until she started to fidget in it. "We'd love to meet his family," she added, as if that made it better. "Make things right, maybe we could all have dinner." I stared at the corner of my sketchbook on the table, tracing it with my finger. "You don't want to meet his family," I said calmly. "You want to meet their money." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "It's honest," I replied. "Which, if we're being fair, hasn't exactly been your strong suit." "Claire, don't be cruel." I almost laughed. Cruel was the way her voice dropped when she said Luke wasn't polished. Cruel was the smirk on Dad's face when he asked Luke if he actually made a living drawing logos. Cruel was the look they gave each other when I said he was important to me, like I was still playing pretend. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just finally being clear." There was another silence, longer this time. I could feel her trying to calculate what angle to take next. "Your father and I miss you. We were just worried about you. We didn't know how special he was. None of it came, just a clipped 'I see.'" Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time afterward, my phone still warm in my hand. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. It was the kind of relief that doesn't come from revenge, but from release. Like setting down a bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. That night I told Luke. He didn't say "I told you so." He just nodded. "You okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, I think I am." For once, I didn't feel like a problem to be solved. I didn't feel like a daughter needing permission. I felt like a woman who knew the value of what she'd built and who she was building it with. And no one was going to twist that into currency. The test strip turned pink in under a minute. I stared at it, perched on the edge of my bathroom sink like it might change its mind if I blinked long enough. It didn't. 2 lines. Bold. Unmistakable. Pregnant. I didn't cry, not at first. I just sat on the closed toilet lid in my oversized hoodie, feet tucked under me, and felt my whole world shift. Not crash, not crumble. Just tilt like a snow globe slowly tipping over. The silence that followed was thick, not empty but full of imagined futures, tiny hands, sleepless nights. The sound of a laugh that hadn't been born yet. And fear, not of the baby, of them, my parents, of what they'd say. Of how they'd twist this into another reason why I was reckless. Unpolished, not enough. I waited a day before telling Luke. It was nighttime, again our shared ritual. I brewed tea and met him out on the porch of our shared rental, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the mug shaking slightly in my hands. He joined me like he always did, settling into the swing beside me, the porch light humming softly above. "I need to tell you something," I said quietly. His body shifted, alert, open. "Okay." I handed him the test. No speech, no build-up, just the truth. He stared at it, blinking once, then again, and then, He nodded, no raised voice, no wild gestures, no pacing or stunned disbelief, just a breath. And then, okay. I stared at him. That's it. He looked at me, his brow softening. Claire, we've done harder things than this. But this changes everything, I whispered. Your life, my plans, the way people see us, what they'll say. He reached for my hand, grounding me. They already say things, but we know who we are. My throat closed. I don't want them at the wedding. It spilled out before I could stop it. He didn't flinch. Okay, he said again. Then, with a smile tugging at his lips, so we're doing a wedding. I laughed, tears slipping out before I could catch them. You're not scared? I asked, voice shaking. I'm terrified, he said honestly. But not of the baby or the vows, just maybe of your dad trying to start a toast. I snorted, choking on the laugh and the tears all at once. Luke pulled me into him, wrapping both arms around my shoulders. I buried my face into his sweater, inhaling the clean, safe scent of him. They'll try to ruin it, I said, voice muffled. Only if you let them. That stopped me, because he was right. They couldn't ruin what I wouldn't give them access to. They didn't get a seat at my table anymore, not just because they disapproved of Luke, but because they had never truly loved me. Not the way parents should, not without strings. I pulled back and looked up at him. I want it to be ours, I said. Not performative, not expensive, just honest. Luke smiled. Then we'll do it our way. And if your dad shows up in a helicopter, then we'll wave from the garden. I laughed again, and this time it was real, sharp and bright and hopeful. I wasn't ready, not to be a wife, not to be a mother. Not to face a world that expected perfection from someone who'd barely scraped by for so long. But I was willing to show up. Willing to stand beside a man who never used his name as leverage. Willing to build a home that felt like warmth, not performance. And that willingness, not readiness, was the beginning of everything. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the sun. Not from nerves, not from excitement, but from clarity. I had something to do. Something that didn't involve flowers or dresses or the taste test drama my friends had begged me to stress about. Something older, deeper. I left Luke a note. Back soon. Just need to clear something before I say yes. Then I drove. Back through the edge of town, past the diner I used to scrub after school. Past the art supply store with the broken A in its sign. Past the intersection where my father once made me walk home because I forgot to text. And eventually into the neighborhood I hadn't visited in months. The house still looked the same. White siding, tidy hedges, porch light flickering like it always had. The car in the driveway was washed. The mailbox was still slightly crooked, perfect from a distance, hollow up close. I parked 2 houses down and just stared at it. There was no part of me that wanted to go inside. I wasn't here for reconciliation. I was here for closure. But just as I stepped out of the car, something or someone caught my eye. He was standing at the end of the block. A man in a tattered coat holding a cardboard sign that said simply, "Need help. Anything." His face was sunburned, his hair tangled, and he leaned slightly to the left like his back hurt. He didn't shout, didn't beg, just stood there, invisible to every car that rolled past. And for a split second, I was 7 years old again. Watching through tear-blurred eyes as my mother closed the shelter cage on a trembling kitten I had begged to keep. "It's too expensive to feed strays," she'd said. "Not our problem," Dad muttered. And I'd whispered, "I'm sorry, I really wanted to keep you," as the door clicked shut behind us. I hadn't thought about that moment in years. But standing there, staring at the man with the sign, it flooded back like a memory that refused to stay buried. My chest tightened. Not because I pitied him, but because I knew in that moment what I would have done as a child if I'd been allowed, so I walked up to him. "Hi," I said softly. He turned, surprised. His eyes were blue, dull, yes, but kind. I nodded toward my car. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" His shoulders tensed. "You don't gotta do that, miss. I'm not dangerous, just tired." I smiled. "I know, I'm not afraid. I just thought, maybe you need a warm breakfast." He blinked, then nodded. I opened the passenger door, brushed off the seat, and waited as he slowly climbed in. We didn't talk much on the drive. Just shared the kind of silence that exists between people who don't expect kindness anymore. When we reached my parents' house, he looked at me, confused. "This where you live?" I shook my head. "Lived. I just need to say something inside. You can come in, have some water, rest for a minute." He hesitated, but followed. The porch creaked like it always did. The door handle still stuck if you turned it too fast. And when I stepped inside, the air hit me like a memory I'd tried to forget. Polished furniture, plastic smiles, and coldness disguised as class. Then I heard my mother's voice from the kitchen. "Claire, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be, oh my God, what is he doing in our house?" The scream snapped like a whip through the hallway. She rushed in, hair done, pearls glinting, lips painted in the shade of ambition. She stared at the man behind me like he'd dragged mud across her marble floors. "Are you out of your mind?" she shrieked. "Luke's parents are coming. What will they think?" I didn't flinch. I stepped aside, letting the man enter fully. He looked around, head tilted, as if the place was familiar in the way pain sometimes is. I turned to her. "He needed help," I said, "so I helped." Her mouth opened, closed. She looked like she wanted to scream again, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the steadiness in my voice. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of her reaction. "I swear," she hissed, "if this ruins today—" "It won't," I interrupted. "But maybe it'll reveal something." I didn't say anything more. I just walked into the living room, poured the man a glass of water, and handed him a clean towel for his hands. The air was thick now, not with shame, with truth. And outside, in the distance, I heard the unmistakable whir of helicopter blades. The rumble grew louder by the second. My mother froze in place, her hand still halfway to her necklace like she couldn't decide whether to clutch it or rip it off. Outside, the wind shifted suddenly, drawing the curtains inward. Even my father, who had emerged from the hallway holding a steaming cup of coffee, stopped mid-sip as the first gust shook the living room windows. "What in the world is that noise?" he muttered. Then came the shadow. Low and deliberate, a private helicopter descended with practiced ease over the manicured lawn, blades slicing the air into sharp whirs. My father dropped his mug, porcelain shattering across the tile, and stepped to the front window like a child seeing snow for the first time. "Is that a helicopter landing on my grass?" I said nothing. The man beside me, the same man my mother had hissed at moments earlier, shifted slightly in his seat, wiping his hands on the towel I'd given him. He didn't seem surprised, not even by the precise landing or the man in uniform who stepped out and crossed the lawn like it was just another Tuesday. The pilot stopped at the porch and knocked once. Calm, measured, my mother was breathless now. "What is happening? Who? Why?" The door opened before she could finish. And the pilot, with his sharp navy blue jacket and headset tucked at his neck, gave a short nod to the man sitting at our table. "Sir," he said clearly, "your helicopter is ready." Silence. Thick, absolute. Then slowly the man stood, straightened his coat, rolled his shoulders like he hadn't done so in a while, and said, "Thank you, Michael, I'll be just a moment." He turned to me first. "I appreciate the tea," he said with a faint smile. "And the towel." I returned the smile. "Thanks for coming." Then he turned to my parents. My mother took a step back. My father looked like he'd forgotten how to speak. The man extended a hand, not in greeting, but almost as a performance. Something old and theatrical, and slowly peeled off the ragged outer layer of his coat, revealing a tailored black suit beneath, sharp at the shoulders and impossibly clean for someone who'd just been mistaken as homeless. "I'm Eric McAllister," he said. Silence again. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. "Founder and CEO of McAllister Dynamics, Luke's father." I couldn't move. My mother made a small choking sound. My father's eyes darted between me, the pilot, and the man who now stood like a lion in the middle of the room. Eric continued, voice calm but cutting. "Claire invited me here this morning. She didn't know who I was when she saw me standing outside. She just saw someone who needed help." He paused. "You saw someone who didn't belong." Neither of them spoke. My mother's lipstick looked suddenly too red. My father's shoulders were drawn up like he expected a blow. Eric turned to me again. "Claire, you passed." Then he turned back to them. "They didn't." My heart slammed once in my chest, an unexpected jolt of emotion, pride, release. I had spent my whole life trying to earn approval from people who couldn't recognize decency unless it arrived in designer shoes. And now, here stood a man who had every reason to look down on me and instead had chosen to show me something better. My parents were frozen, shamed not by my voice, but by his. And it was only just beginning. Eric stepped toward the door, nodded once more to the pilot, and then paused before leaving. "One more thing," he said, not turning back. "The people who matter won't care about the car you drive or the watch on your wrist. They'll care whether you stopped for a stranger in the rain." Then he was gone. The wind swirled through the open doorway, and I looked at my parents, who suddenly seemed so small in the vast, echoing space of their curated home. "You didn't even help a man at your door," I said softly. And for the first time in my life, they had nothing to say. The rotor blades faded into the distance like a storm retreating over the hills, and with them, the last shred of guilt I had been carrying since childhood lifted. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, didn't wait for an apology, didn't need one. The man who'd raised a boy like Luke had just shown me what grace looked like, and it wasn't loud. It wasn't glamorous. It was quiet, honest, and impossible to fake. Luke met me at the airstrip, a nervous smile pulling at his lips. He wore the same dark navy suit from the engagement dinner, but it somehow looked different now, less like a costume, more like armor. "You ready?" he asked, his voice a low hum beneath the wind. I nodded, and he took my hand without a word. The flight to the estate didn't take long, but every mile felt like a goodbye, not just to my parents' house, but to the version of me that still thought I had to shrink to be safe. The estate was nothing like I expected. Not cold, not pretentious. It was coastal and calm, perched on a cliffside with long glass windows and salt air brushing against the stone path. Wildflowers grew along the edge of the lawn like no one had told them this was supposed to be wealthy. Luke's mother stood waiting on the patio, and from the second I saw her, I knew, not because she was elegant, though she was in that unspoken way that comes from quiet confidence, but because her eyes were warm. The kind of warm that didn't ask for proof. She stepped forward, wrapped me in an embrace, and whispered, "Thank you for loving my son exactly the way he is." It was the only time I cried that day. We spent the afternoon on the balcony, plates of fruit between us, the ocean endless and blue. Luke and his father swapped old family stories, and I watched them both, how they moved, how they laughed, and I realized something that startled me. I didn't feel out of place. Not because I'd suddenly become someone else, but because, for once, the people around me weren't trying to mold me into their expectations. They were simply glad I was there. Later, as the sky turned amber and gold, Luke's mom walked beside me toward the garden. The air was soft, the world slow. "I was scared of your world," I admitted quietly. She smiled, not surprised. "Most people are, it has sharp corners. I thought I'd have to change." She looked at me with kind certainty. "And yet you're the only one who truly belongs in it." That stopped me. I turned to face her. "Why?" "Because you remember where you came from," she said, "and you chose not to let it harden you." The words landed deep, so deep I could feel them taking root somewhere I hadn't known was still wounded. Not all legacies are inherited, some are earned. And as I stood there, hand in Luke's, surrounded by wildflowers and sea wind, I realized I had finally built a life not from rebellion, but from redirection. I wasn't who my parents wanted me to be. I was something better, someone free. 2 years later, I watched my daughter smear blueberries across her cheeks as if it were war paint. She was barely 2, all curls and wild squeals, tiny feet stomping in the grass while I tried to keep her sketchbook from blowing off the picnic table. The garden party buzzed behind us, laughter, clinking glasses, soft jazz drifting over the hedges, but I was focused on her, on us. She giggled again, holding up one of my pencils like a trophy, then collapsed in my lap with dramatic flair. Her little body melted into mine like she knew she belonged there. Like this moment, this calm, joyful now, was always meant to be. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "You're the best thing I ever created." And I meant it, not my art, not the house. Not even the healing, her. Luke joined us moments later, balancing a plate of tiny sandwiches like a waiter in a suit too expensive to care if he spilled anything. "She's raided the blueberry tray again," he said with a smirk. "She's a McAllister," I replied. "Big appetites, bold moves." He grinned and handed me a napkin, kissing my cheek before sitting beside us in the grass. I felt it then. The stillness. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. Behind us, the conversation at the party shifted. Polite laughter, more introductions. And then somewhere near the back hedge, a pair of voices I hadn't heard in over a year. Familiar, careful. A little too polished, my parents. They had come, not uninvited, but not exactly welcome either. They'd reached out months ago, an apology email so stiff I almost mistook it for a business memo. I hadn't replied right away. And when I did, I told them this: you can come to her birthday. But this isn't a reunion, it's a reminder. I didn't expect much. And true to form, they arrived late, dressed too formally, and hovered on the edges like guests at the wrong wedding. My mother wore beige. My father had a monogrammed handkerchief tucked too visibly into his jacket. They didn't approach me right away. When they finally did, it was tentative, awkward. "Claire," my mom said, her voice low, "you look radiant." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a jab either. My father stood beside her, eyes fixed on the toddler now trying to color the soles of her shoes with a purple crayon. "She's beautiful," he said softly. I nodded. "She is." There was a pause, a long one, and then my mother said, "We're sorry for before," just like that. No excuses, no rewrites, not perfect, but enough. I didn't hug them, didn't cry. I just gave a small nod, not cruel, not cold. "Thank you," I said. "I accept that." Not for them, for me. Because forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the leash. My daughter tugged on my hand then, demanding more paper. I handed her a fresh sheet and smiled as she flopped onto her belly, humming nonsense while she scribbled. I didn't look back at my parents. They stayed for an hour, left quietly. No scene, just silence where there used to be static. And as I watched my child grow sun-drunk and joy-wild in the late afternoon light, I knew I didn't need revenge. I didn't need redemption. I had her, and I had me. That was enough.